Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. So we're not going to be doing an official review today. I thought it would be fun just to go through some of the things that I've been reading and seeing if you guys have seen those things. We can talk about it together, or if you haven't, you might find some of them interesting recommendations to check out. So we'll go through some books, which includes prose and poetry, comics. I haven't been watching as many movies as I usually do lately. I feel like with everything else I've been doing, I just haven't had the time to, and they're usually a longer commitment for me to sit down for, 2-3 hours and watch something and really get into it. But if I can think of stuff that I've watched lately, I will let you know. So first things up, the first book that I read this year was called Infinite Ground by Martin MacInnes. So I believe this was his debut book, and it's a little bit of like a sci-fi mystery, even though that does not describe it well at all. So it follows the story of this detective in South America trying to trace a missing persons case. So Carlos is this man who works for this large corporate organization, and it's a very mysterious organization. And the investigation takes him through the jungles of, I don't even know if they specify what country it is, or if they kind of made like a made-up country within South America, but the story follows a little bit of a structure where like a man goes further and further into the jungle, and that kind of like coincides with his like descent into madness and everything becoming more confusing around him. And it's definitely one of those books where you don't get any answers by the end, so I feel like a lot of people at this point, you can probably decide if this is for you or if it isn't. And it's also written in that really dense prose that not everyone is a fan of, including me. Like, I don't usually gravitate to books that are purposefully difficult to read, and it does make me feel like I am back in my English degree doing like a university book or something, and I'm reading this for my lesson for my tutor, and I'm trying to like figure out everything that's going on, but then I remembered that I'm not at uni and I can just kind of push ahead without completely understanding what's going on. I feel like the positives of the book is that it is a really interesting concept because, okay, this is like spoilery territory, but you get to see it from like the front cover as well, and a little bit of the blurb, I think. It's kind of like a biological mystery where this guy, Carlos, who had disappeared, like he leaves like traces of himself in the room that he disappeared in. And a recurring idea or theory in the story is that he kind of disintegrated into the world around him, as if he, like his molecules and his cells just kind of poof. And there's one point in the story where the detective starts feeling unwell. He starts spending a lot of time in Carlos's office trying to recreate the exact scenario before his disappearance, and he starts like looking at the walls, he starts looking at the books, and he becomes like hyper aware of like the material element of things around him, and he starts like experiencing things at like a molecular level, and it's like really uncomfortable, but it's also the type of thing where you can't tell if this is just in his head or if something is biologically happening to him. And that is kind of the draw of the story if you are into that kind of thing, if you love just weird sci-fi concepts, and if you're not too bothered about having like a satisfying ending, this is the book for you. The second thing that I've been reading, which I haven't actually finished, is Butter Honey Pig Bread. That is by Francesca Ekwuyasi. And this novel I saw at the like Lambda literary website last year. It was nominated for a bunch of awards. It might have actually won a few awards by now, and if you don't know what the Lambda literary organization is, they're basically an organization that champions LGBTQ literature around the world. I think they're US based or US founded at least. And Butter Honey Pig Bread is kind of like a familial story about this woman, Kambirinachi. I think she's from Nigeria, and she has 2 twin daughters, Kahinde and Taye, and the entire book is set up from all 3 of their perspectives that kind of rotate within every chapter. It has a really nice rhythm and a flow to it, even when they're switching perspectives like every chapter. I don't read a lot of books that pull that off well, and it's a really great story that spans basically their entire lives, because it starts when Kambirinachi is a young girl. It follows her childhood, growing up, going to school, college, and then when you get to her daughter's perspectives, Kehinde and Taye, the two of them are already grown up, and Kambirinachi is already like an older woman. And one of her daughters went to Canada to study, and the other one went to London. And you get to see kind of like the impacts of diaspora on a family, and the way that creates a little bit of conflict in the way that they all relate to each other, and the way that time has passed when they have grown up in different continents. It kind of feels like the story of a real family. And especially to me, someone who moved, from Indonesia to the UK, and if you have family living in other countries, especially when you're like generations apart, I think you can kind of relate to this. I think you can definitely appreciate the complexities of what that does to a family, and I love the way that this book is currently exploring it. This book also has a great array of Nigerian cooking, especially because the title is called Butter Honey Pig Bread. One of the daughters, Taye, she studied as a professional chef, and that's part of her character, and every now and then she starts cooking in their family home in Lagos, and you just get to see the amazing recipes she comes up with, and I would actually love to try to make some of these. In terms of poetry, I have been reading some of the issues from 14 Poems. Here you go, you can see the actual physical copies. They're a London-based publication that focuses on publishing queer poetry, and even though they're London-based, they publish writers from all over the place, really. And so this is issue 1, and this is issue 3. I have issue 2 somewhere, it's floating around, I think. And it's really beautiful. It's one of those anthologies that you can just pick up and read in one sitting. And the quality, I love the design of them and how they look. I think it's just like simple and beautiful. They have their own distinct style that you can immediately recognize. The poems here feel very contemporary, very modern, and that's the thing with having an anthology, is because you get a huge range of perspectives from people. They might have a bit of humor in them, they might have a bit of angst or grief in them, they might have romance. And yeah, I love discovering new poems and picking up anthologies like this. This is one of the things that I miss from being locked down because of COVID and everything. I think the best way to find new poetry is actually to go to festivals, book festivals, or specifically poetry festivals, when you're just kind of walking around all these stalls. Another collection that I enjoyed, I read this one over Christmas actually, was The Black Unicorn by Audre Lorde. I know Audre Lorde is probably one of the most famous poets out there, and I hadn't actually read this collection until recently. She has a really, really beautiful quality to her writing, a lot of like earthy tones, a lot of depictions of the body, the feminine, motherhood, womanhood. I feel like there isn't much I can say about Audre Lorde that either hasn't been said already or would feel extremely inadequate, but I really would recommend her to anyone. I think she has an exceptional mastery of the craft of poetry. It's one of those writers where I just read, her work and I'm just like, I don't know how you're doing this, and I'm so in awe. Lastly, on the poetry front, I have also been reading this anthology called The Very Inside, edited by Sharon Lim Hing. It's an anthology of writing by Asian and Pacific Islander, lesbian, and bisexual women. You might be noticing a pattern here with what I've been reading. I just feel like queer poetry is the most interesting of all, and this is a subject for a whole other video essay that I am not prepared for right now. For all of you interested in queer history, Asian history, especially in the US, I would recommend this book. I think when you start thinking about a lot of social movements, a lot of social issues and discussions that go on today, a lot of questions and a lot of topics have already been answered and discussed many, many years ago by people who have gone through the exact same struggle. I guess this is also another testament to why history is so important. And to me, at least, I have always loved reading about history through the lens of poetry, through the medium of poetry, just because there's something so expressionist and so personal about it in a way that records can't be, like narrated records. And books and anthologies like this really give a better picture of people as people, really, instead of just a story of what happened back then. So it's not just poetry as well, there are also essays and visual art. So I think it's been really well edited by Sharon Lim-Hing, and there's a great range of stuff for everyone to enjoy. So in terms of comic books, I recently read DCeased. I have the hardback with me right here. It was just struggling to come off the floor. Here he is, Zombie Batman. I am probably a little embarrassed to admit I had no idea what this story was to begin with, and because I had actually seen some of the variant covers that they were making back when this first launched. I think it was 2018 or 2019, and they were doing them based on like horror movie posters. And yeah, I bought some of those variant covers, never read the actual comic, and I really was unprepared by how brutal and depressing it was. I don't know if it's just me, guys. I have not read anything as depressing as this in a comic book in so long. Maybe it's because I just read it all at once, and also, so this is basically about a virus that takes out the whole world. So Darkseid gets the anti-life equation through Cyborg, but because of that, it kind of merges with his technology and it spreads through technology. So everyone on Earth who looks at a screen is basically corrupted by it, and yeah, the heroes have to start like killing off people, their friends as well, who are corrupted by the virus, because they'll just spread it to someone else. And it also plays out in this like mystery suspense style of like which hero is gonna get it next, and it just ends up in like a series of really brutal and like graphic killings of each other, which maybe it's because right now we're living through an actual pandemic, so I feel like this is one of those things that have just become like too real. This came out like years ago, so I'm not blaming it for that, and I know like the whole idea of like a zombie apocalypse has been in fiction forever, but I do feel that DC did take like a really dark turn with this one, and I'm not sure if I enjoyed it. Maybe that's just a testament to the writing and how they executed it, because there were some like really heart-wrenching emotional moments, especially when it came to Superman and his dad, and then Batman and his kids who got corrupted by the virus, and eventually like Superman gets corrupted by the virus as well. So the end of the book basically kind of leaves them at a point where it's hopeless, basically. Earth is just beyond saving because so many people have gotten the virus at this point. And the minute Superman gets it, people are like, it's over, we gotta go, we gotta jet. A lot of people would argue the minute Batman gets the virus is the minute that everything was like game over, because, you know, Batman's the guy who can think his way out of any problem, and he's kind of used as like a way out of things that seem impossible. The second Superman gets the virus though, that's the second everyone kind of agrees that, yeah, we're not getting out of this, and they have to start like shipping people off Earth, and some people stay behind to like hold back the defenses, including Harley and Ivy, really sad. The Amazons as well stay behind. Cyborg is holding off Wonder Woman because she also gets the virus in the end. And she also kind of reveals, because he uses the lasso of truth on her to make the virus speak from within her, and the virus reveals that there is actually a cure for it. But before we actually hear what it is, I think she dies. So I felt like that twist at the end was kind of just like, I don't know what that was for, but I guess it was kind of a sequel bait for the next one, because I know they're continuing this with DCeased Dead Planet. And I feel like the difference between something like this and something like Injustice is that in Injustice we can clearly tell that these are different versions of these characters, and you can say that this takes place in like an alternate universe, so it is technically a different version of this character, but they're as close to canon as they can be, so we're kind of like seeing our canon characters go through the pain of loss, death, grief, and like unimaginable trauma. And actually it reminds me of what they did in Justice League Dark Apocalypse War last year, the animated film that was going to be the last of their their series. I wasn't a fan of that either, just because of how like gratuitous it felt, and I'm honestly not a person opposed to violence, gore, or like depressing topics, but I do feel there's a time and a place for it. I think this is also why people were really unhappy with what happened in Heroes in Crisis, what they did to Wally West. I haven't read the full thing, but I kind of know what happens. When it feels like they're doing it simply for like the shock value, it kind of loses its charm. Alright, so we're taking a huge 180 swerve here, and the last comic I would like to talk about is this comic that I found online, actually. It's called Cameraman by Sunmi, and it's really one of those beautiful slice of life comics that follows the story of a trans man working in kind of like a BuzzFeed-esque environment where they're going to different restaurants and filming food and doing commentary on it. So he's the cameraman while the two co-hosts are, you know, running the show. And while they're going through all these restaurants, they go to a Korean restaurant that is run by another trans man who he meets, and they, you know, they hit it off and they have a connection, and there's like this really nice love story, but it's also a story about the struggles of finding a queer community in a new place, because it's said that he's just moved into this town a while back and he's not really out into his workplace yet. There are also other trans people in the company as well, but you know, he's just not at a point where he's out there and making friends. So from that perspective, you can also definitely see it as a story about someone who is moving into a new place and hasn't really found his people yet, which is something I think everyone can relate to. And he talks about, you know, moving from a suburban neighborhood to a much bigger town like this one, and the owner of the Korean restaurant, he talks about like his immigrant family background as well. So I feel like it's one of those stories that really portrays a beautiful slice of life experience, and the artwork is exquisite, by the way. It has that like hand-drawn quality with like ink ballpoint pens. I think it's because of the color scheme chosen here. It's all in blue and white. So it does feel like the artist is just using this one pen to draw everything, and a lot of great techniques, especially in some of the background textures. This comic has a lot of texture, which is a really great thing to have, especially when you're mainly distributing digitally, because it kind of gives that tangible quality to the paper. It doesn't feel like you're looking at a screen. Some amazing panels as well that kind of looks into the video editing process, because he's involved in also editing these food videos that they're putting out onto the internet. And yeah, they're just so beautiful, and I could stare at them all day. I love comics that have food in them. Maybe I just love stories that feature food in them. So yes, if you're looking for something new to read, I would definitely recommend Cameraman. I'll put the link in my description box below. I'll put all the links to everything that I mentioned in the description box. A couple things in the pipeline for the next few weeks, so do stay tuned. Come back to this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye!